Thank you, Amal. Well, hello everyone. Thank you for being here today. So this afternoon I'm going to talk to you about harmonizing complexity and balancing abstractions in platform design. So I'm Hana Amiri, and I'm a system architect at Octo Technology. I'm based in Paris, and this is my first DDD Europe conference as a speaker. So I hope you actually learned something useful from me today. Okay, great. So I'm going to start with talking about platforms as a complex system and the role of abstractions to help reduce and simplify the complexity in platforms, and finish with a heuristic on how to build good and useful abstractions. So before we move on, I'd like to mention that finding a good definition to define platforms is actually not very easy. You will probably see a lot of different definitions on the internet or in different literature. I'm not going to go through that right now, so bear with me until a few moments later. I'm going to start, however, with a book that I really enjoyed recently that was released by Gregor Hope, talking about platform strategy. And in his book, he actually mentions 4 different types of platforms. The first type is what we call the marketplace platform, and it will help us to connect and facilitate the interaction between different sides, buyers and sellers, through what we call the flywheel effect. So that means that the more buyers you get on the marketplace, the more sellers you will attract. And the more sellers you will attract, the more buyers you will get. And think of this as a self-reinforcing cycle of growth and engagement. So the second type is the base platform. And when talking about this, you can instantly think of Azure or AWS Cloud, for example, that will allow developers and IT professionals to create and develop different products and applications on top of that. The third type is the developer platform, or what we call right now the engineering engineering platform, that is actually the hype since a few years now. And this actually allows to streamline the software delivery lifecycle in companies. And usually these type of developer platforms are developed in-house and also developed on top of base platforms. The fourth type, which is probably the one you know the most as it's common for a long time now, which is the business capability platform. So think, for example, Shopify or Salesforce that have standard business capabilities for enterprises and companies to use them and customize them and personalize them to their own requirements. So all of these platforms have things in common that we're going to talk about later. But we have 25 minutes, probably less, with the technical issue we had. So I'm not going to go into the detail of every one of them, but I'm going to start with an example that is inspired by my previous experiences working on designing and implementing marketplaces and e-commerce platforms. So imagine that you have a company or a marketplace that sells makeup products, and this company offers 3 types of services. For example, a product search where the users will be able to search for a specific product, as easy as that, and a virtual try-on service where they will be allowed to test the makeup product before they actually buy it. The recommendation engine will allow the sellers to recommend specific products to their buyers based on, for example, their preferences, their search history, or their profiles. we have different teams that are working independently on these services or subdomains, or you can call them whatever you want. This is not the point of this presentation. And so far, everything is going great until the company decides to expand its business to include categories like skincare or fragrance, for example. These categories have a lot of similarities with the makeup brand, the makeup category or domain, where they all use or offer product search capabilities or recommendation engine capability as well. But they also have a lot of specifics. So for example, the skincare category or domain in the recommendation engine will be more focused on using things like ingredients compatibility and skin analysis results, while the makeup will be using things like color matching, trends, and texture probably to recommend products. So the same thing, we will have different teams working on these different domains or subdomains. But the problem with this is each of these teams will be working on different instances of the same product each time, or the same service each time, which will result in a lot of redundancy in the code and a lot of complexity that will increase in our system. This will also increase the cognitive load on our developers and the people maintaining and operating these services. And also, our user experience will become probably more fragmented because we're probably not going to implement these services the same way across the domain. So what is the solution to this? I think you already guessed it. So the solution is to standardize these similarities and these common aspects into what we call abstractions. These abstractions will elevate the similarities that we have to a new semantic level and a new domain where these abstractions will be exposed to be used by the different domains, makeup, skincare, and fragrance that we have. This will also allow to have a dedicated team and a new organizational structure on this system. And this team is actually called platform team in team topologies. And the role of this platform team is to reduce the cognitive load on the stream-aligned teams or the product teams. So by standardizing these commonalities and these similarities into what we call a platform, we will have a solid foundation to build our system. And Gregor Hope mentions something very smart in his book when he says that platforms are abstractions that actually work. But what does this mean exactly, abstractions that actually work? A platform is a way to standardize commonly reused aspects and components of your system and enable you to grow an ecosystem of products and applications and experiences and help you to boost innovation and diversification into your system. So you can think of this as also an abstraction that actually covers the different types of platforms that we saw in the beginning. There's a lot of contradicting words in this definition right here. So as you can see, we have standard, innovation, common, diversification. Probably doesn't make sense, but how does all these things actually work together And what is the actual role of abstractions in all of this? There's a very good example that I like in Walt Disney, where animators and content creators are actually reusing common aspects in different movies and different scenes by encapsulating them into a higher level component that could be reused across different movies and different systems. If we apply this thing to our marketplace use case, we will see that the same way, we're actually encapsulating what is common between these different categories or different domains to a higher component or a higher domain that could be reused across all of them. So in the future, if I have another category that is going to be added that has product search or recommendation engine, I'm not going to be reinventing the wheel, and I'm not going to be developing the same thing from scratch. I'm going to be able to reuse what I already have to build my ecosystem. Abstractions also will help us to enable scale and innovation. So if you look at the diagram, once you start introducing your abstraction in your design, your development effort will probably start to decrease over time, as your developers will be reusing the same components to build and deploy faster and cheaper. And this will actually help us to unlock the economy of scale and speed. And all the money, the effort, and the time that you are saving, you will probably be able to invest it in innovation and unlocking the economy of scope. But all of this sounds very cool and exciting, but if this was true, all companies would be successful platforms by now, and they would all be unlocking the economies of scope, speed, and scale. But it's not this easy. The most common question that I get from my clients is, how do I know that I'm actually implementing the right level for my abstraction? And how do I know that my abstraction is useful and is going to be adopted by my teams? And the answer to this question actually comes from the software engineering commonality variability analysis that tells us that every aspect that is common in my code or in my domain will be the core essence of my abstraction and will be generalized, allowing for all the variants and all the specifics to be exposed as parameters or configurations or any other mean. So how do I know that my code is actually common or specific? This is where domain-driven design tools will be very useful for us. So a useful abstraction is actually designed with a clear understanding of your business domains, because these tools will allow you to understand your business logic, the boundaries, the interactions between the domains, and also the rules that govern them. And in a lot of examples I've seen before, companies actually tend to build their abstractions bottom up, so they actually start from the code, which is not usually a good way to build abstractions, because your abstraction will become highly complicated or complex, and most importantly, it's going to be misaligned with your business logic and your business requirements. So this is why domain-driven design advocates for a top-down approach where you start with a deep understanding of your business domain in order to build your abstractions. A useful abstraction is not just a way to cover as much use cases as possible. It is also how the abstraction itself is going to behave, and sometimes it's also about enforcing certain rules and certain patterns into the design of this abstraction. So I worked a lot about integrating different e-commerce platforms, especially the ones that you see in here, Shopify and commerce tools. And even though usually these platforms offer basically the same functionalities and the same services, you will find things like inventory management, product catalog, payment processing, or checkout. They still don't do it in the same way or implement it in the same way. Shopify, for example, has a very opinionated approach to its checkout experience, where you cannot actually customize or personalize anything but the look and feel of your checkout. You will not be able to make changes to the flow or to the steps of your checkout. Commerce tools, however, have a very different approach to this, where they will give you all the building blocks to be able to, personalize the checkout experience to your own requirements and to your own needs. Both of these are okay, and both of these are good ways to develop abstractions. And in fact, both of them are opinionated approaches, even though I'm not writing the same thing on the slide, because both of them actually took the decision and a position on how their abstraction should behave and should look like and be used by the companies or by developers. And taking a decision on how to expose your abstraction is not usually an easy decision, but this is why we have design authorities and architects that will help us navigate the trade-offs of the different use cases, because they have a broader knowledge of the future requirements, the company's strategy, and the overall system and its components as well. So a useful abstraction is also there to help you reduce the cognitive load on your stream-aligned teams and also help them work without friction and without dependence on the others. So that means that your abstraction needs to be independent and loosely coupled, and needs to define clear interfaces and well-defined interface to how it will be consumed. So that means if I need to use the product search, for example, in the makeup domain, I'm not going to bother myself with understanding the specifics of skincare domain or fragrance domain. And bounded contexts in domain-driven design is a very good way to do this and to help you design independent and loosely coupled abstractions. So, for example, the customer-supplier pattern in bounded contexts will help you understand the flow of change and also to understand the if there's a change, for example, on the side of the supplier, it will be communicated clearly to the customer to use it. The open host service also, for example, will allow the context that is using the product search context to use this abstraction without bothering with the internal details of this context. So we talked a lot about the design of abstractions, but this is not the only thing that we need to look into when building and managing abstractions, because effective abstractions are also something managed by an effective governance and an effective team organization. So when we talk about team topologies, the platform team is always responsible for reducing the cognitive load. But sadly, in a lot of companies that use this or that have platform teams, they're still acting like the platform team is a traditional IT service, where this team doesn't have autonomy over its own roadmap, its own budgeting, and its own priorities, which will result most of the time in very biased abstractions, because probably some business domain or domain that has more money or more budget or louder or has more power in the company will enforce their own priorities into the platform team's roadmap. So this will create a lot of bottlenecks and will result in a hardly reusable abstraction. So that means that a useful abstraction is also governed by an empowered platform team that has its own priorities and its own decision-making on the roadmap of the platform. However, this team still needs to collaborate and work closely with the stream-aligned teams to make sure that they're actually aligned with their requirements. And this collaboration is not a one-time thing, and it's not a one-step either, because you need to make sure that you are iterating and getting feedbacks from your team to be able to understand that your abstraction is actually aligned. And this is where implementing or adopting a product approach and iterative design will help you build the right level of abstraction as well. So your business domains will evolve, probably in the future, and so will your abstraction, because it is actually a part of your domain. It is a translation to your domain as well. So you need to accept also that your abstractions might not be perfect from the first iteration, and build it with an iterative mindset. So what I want you to leave with today is that your abstractions are the core of your platform design, and building good abstractions will allow you to unlock the promises of platforms. So the keys to designing useful abstractions is actually to start with understanding your business domain and your business strategy. And in your design, you need to make sure that you design your abstraction for loose coupling and independence, and make sure that you have the right governance and team organization for your platform team. And finally, also design your abstraction to be evolved and with a product mindset. Thank you, everyone.